The crystal glass shattered against the hardwood floor 3 feet from where I stood, red wine spreading across the dining room like a bloodstain. 48 relatives went silent mid-conversation, forks suspended over their Thanksgiving plates. My father's chest was heaving, his face the color of the cranberry sauce cooling on the table. My mother had her hand over her mouth, but her eyes were hard. Calculating. And my sister Brooke sat at the far end of the table, crying perfectly photogenic tears into her napkin while her fiancé rubbed her back in slow, sympathetic circles. "You're really going to say no?" my father said, his voice shaking with rage. "To your own sister?" I looked down at my phone at the text I just sent 4 minutes ago and slipped it back into my purse. "Yes," I said calmly. "I am. My name is Maya Richardson. I'm 31 years old and I'm a senior compliance officer for a tech company in downtown Portland. I make $91,000 a year, and 3 years ago, I bought a 1,200 square foot loft in the Pearl District for $425,000. I bought it alone. I furnished it alone. I've paid every single mortgage payment, property tax bill, and HOA fee alone. And now my parents wanted me to sign it over to my 27-year-old sister because she needed it more." The announcement had come 20 minutes earlier, right after my uncle had finished saying grace. My mother had stood up, tapping her wine glass with her wedding ring, smiling at the assembled family like she was about to share wonderful news. "Before we eat," she'd said warmly, "Tom and I want to share something beautiful that's happening in our family. As many of you know, Brooke and Derek are getting married next June." Applause had rippled around the table. Brooke had blushed and waved. "They've been looking for a place to start their life together," my mother continued, "and housing prices are just impossible right now for young couples. So Maya has generously agreed to sign her condo over to them as a wedding gift." The applause had started again, but I'd cut through it. "No, I haven't." My mother's smile had frozen. "What?" "I haven't agreed to anything," I'd said clearly, looking around the table at my aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents. "This is the first I'm hearing about this." My father had leaned forward. "Maya, we discussed this last week. You told me Brooke was having trouble finding an apartment in her budget," I'd interrupted. "You asked if I had any advice. I gave you the name of my real estate agent. That's not the same as agreeing to give away my home." Brooke had started crying then, real tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe you're being like this," she'd said. "I thought you loved me." "I do love you," I'd replied. "But I'm not giving you my condo." That's when my father had thrown the glass. Now standing in my parents' dining room surrounded by shattered crystal and shocked family members, I could feel every eye on me. "Maya owns a 2-bedroom, my mother said, her voice tight and controlled. "She lives alone. Brooke and Derek need space to start a family." "I need space too," I said. "It's my home." "You're being selfish," my father snapped. "That condo is too much for one person. You don't need all that space." "Then I'll decide what to do with it," I replied. "Not you." My Aunt Jennifer cleared her throat awkwardly. "Maybe we should talk about this privately." "No," my mother said sharply. "Maya needs to hear this from her family. She needs to understand what's right." My cousin David was scrolling on his phone, clearly uncomfortable. My grandmother looked between my parents and me with troubled eyes. "What's right," I said slowly, "is that I worked for 10 years to save a down payment. I qualified for the mortgage on my own income. I've made every payment on time for 3 years. That condo is mine." "Family is supposed to help each other," Brooke said, her voice breaking. "You make so much more than me." "I'm a compliance officer," I interrupted. "You're a part-time yoga instructor who quit her full-time job because you didn't like your manager. Those were choices, Brooke." The room went very quiet. "How dare you?" my mother breathed. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. "Someone will be here in about 90 minutes, I said calmly. "Until then, I think we should all just eat our dinner." "Who's coming here?" my father demanded. "My real estate attorney," I replied. I thought it might be helpful to have a professional explain some things. The next 2 hours were the most uncomfortable of my life. Most of the relatives tried to make small talk, pretending the explosion hadn't happened. A few quietly asked me if I was okay. My cousin Rachel squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Good for you." But my parents barely spoke. Brooke refused to look at me. and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. I picked at my turkey and mashed potatoes, my stomach in knots, watching the clock. At 6:47 p.m. the doorbell rang. My father started to stand, but I was already up. "I'll get it." I opened the door to find Catherine Alvarez standing on the porch, briefcase in hand. She was 53, with sharp gray eyes and an expression that had intimidated opposing counsel in more real estate disputes than I could count. She'd been my attorney when I bought the loft. I'd called her the moment my mother had first floated this idea a week ago, and she'd told me to let her know if things escalated. They had. "Maya," she said, shaking my hand. "Show me where." I led her into the dining room. Every head turned. "Everyone," I said, "this is Catherine Alvarez. She's a real estate attorney. Catherine, these are my parents, Tom and Linda Richardson. And this is my sister, Brooke." Catherine nodded professionally. She didn't smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Richardson. I understand there's been some discussion about transferring Maya's property to her sister." My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My father found his voice first. "This is a family matter." "Property transfer is a legal matter," Catherine interrupted smoothly. "And since Maya called me with concerns about coercion, I thought it would be prudent to clarify a few things." She set her briefcase on the edge of the dining table and pulled out a file folder. "First, let's establish the facts. Maya Richardson purchased a condominium at 847 Northwest 12th Avenue on November 3, 3 years ago, for $425,000. She put down 20%, $85,000, and financed the remainder through a conventional mortgage." Catherine pulled out a document and placed it in front of my parents. "This is the deed. As you can see, Maya is the sole owner. Her name is the only name on the title." My father glanced at the deed, his jaw working. "The current market value of the property is approximately $495,000, Catherine continued. "Maya has $347,000 remaining on her mortgage. Her equity position is roughly $148,000. Brooke's fiancé Derek shifted uncomfortably. I wondered if he'd known the actual numbers. If Maya were to sign over this property to her sister, as was announced tonight, there would be significant legal and financial implications." Catherine pulled out another document. "First, the transfer would be considered a gift under IRS regulations. The fair market value of the gift would be $495,000. Maya would be required to file a gift tax return, and that amount would count against her lifetime gift and estate tax exemption." My mother's face was pale. "We didn't know." "Additionally," Catherine continued, not pausing, "Brooke would assume the existing mortgage of $347,000. She would need to qualify for the loan on her own income and credit." "Brooke, what's your current annual income?" Brooke stared at her plate. "I make around $23,000. "Then no lender would approve you for a $347,000 mortgage," Catherine said matter-of-factly. "Your debt-to-income ratio would be over 200%. Derek cleared his throat. "What if we both applied?" "What's your income?" Catherine asked. "I'm a personal trainer. I made about $38,000 last year." Catherine didn't even blink. "Combined, you'd still be well below the threshold for approval. The mortgage would need to be paid off in full before the property could transfer, which means Maya would need to come up with $347,000 in cash, or Brooke and Derek would need to secure independent financing for the full purchase price." The silence in the room was deafening. "But the most important point," Catherine said, looking directly at my parents, "is that property transfer under duress or coercion is grounds for legal action. If Maya were pressured, threatened, or manipulated into signing over her property, she could sue to void the transfer and recover damages." My father's hands were gripping the edge of the table. "No one is threatening anyone. You threw a glass at your daughter when she refused to give away her home," Catherine said calmly. "In front of 48 witnesses. That's assault, Mr. Richardson." The color drained from his face. Catherine pulled out one more document. "This is a notice I've prepared on Maya's behalf. It states clearly that she has no intention of transferring her property to any family member, now or in the future. It requests that all discussion of such a transfer cease immediately. And it puts you on notice that any further attempts to pressure, coerce, or manipulate her will result in legal action, including a potential restraining order. She slid the document across the table to my parents. My mother's hands were shaking as she picked it up. She read it once, twice, then set it down like it had burned her. Maya has been extraordinarily generous with this family, Catherine continued. I've reviewed her bank records at her request. Over the past 5 years, she's provided over $62,000 in financial support to various family members. My Aunt Karen's eyebrows shot up. Several cousins exchanged glances. She paid for Brooke's car when Brooke totaled hers 2 years ago. $8,000. She covered your property taxes last year when you had cash flow issues, Mr. and Mrs. Richardson. $6,200. She's given Brooke approximately $1,500 a month for the past year to supplement her income. Brooke's head snapped up. You told me that was from Mom and Dad. Because we told you it was from us, my mother said quietly, not looking at her. Maya didn't want you to feel bad. Why would I feel bad? Brooke demanded, her voice rising. She has more money than me. She should help. She doesn't owe you anything, Catherine said, cutting through Brooke's protest. And the expectation that she does is exactly why we're here. He turned back to my parents. I strongly suggest you read this document carefully and abide by its terms. Maya is well within her rights to cut off all financial support to this family, effective immediately. She's chosen not to do that yet, but if this conversation continues, she may reconsider. My father really looked at me for the first time all evening. Maya, we didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said quietly. You meant exactly this. You've always meant this. I stood up and picked up my purse. I'm leaving. Catherine, thank you for coming. Of course, she said, closing her briefcase. Call me if anything changes. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to face the table. Brooke, I love you. But you're not entitled to my life. Derek, I'm sure you're a great guy, but you need to have some hard conversations with your fiancé about money and expectations. Mom, Dad, I'll be taking a break from family events until you can treat me like an adult instead of an ATM. I looked around the room at my extended family. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. I didn't hear from my parents for 6 weeks. When my mother finally called, it was to apologize. Really apologize, not the fake kind where she blamed me for overreacting. Brooke sent me a text 3 months later. I broke off the engagement. You were right. I'm sorry. We met for coffee after that. It was awkward, but it was a start. My parents asked if I'd come to Christmas. I said maybe next year. I spent Christmas in my loft, the one I'd earned, the one I'd fought for, the one that was mine. And it was the most peaceful holiday I'd ever had.